So the Senior Executives Association is a professional association that represents senior career leaders in the government. I think you described kind of the level that they're at. These are your senior vice president level kind of people in industry.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 10,000 of them across the entire federal government. Most of them are career federal workers, although there's some that are political appointees or are limited term. And then there are a lot of other senior type of staff, like the HQEs that you mentioned, who have different roles and purposes. And to me, um, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, the government's personnel office, would always say it's not our job to think about or even know about all those other types of appointment
Permutations.
authorities that are
Yeah.
outside of Title V, which is the civilian core civilian part of federal employment. But there are hundreds of thousands of non-Title V employees within the Defense Department, among other agencies. We have this classification for executive level leaders. I basically see it as a pay system because other than that, we're not, there is no strategic or thoughtful development program in any agency or across the government for these people to build an actual cadre of leaders who have some common management and leadership understandings. Like they share a language around executive leadership and a culture around executive leadership. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I think you see is that there's all these variations agency by agency where the agency culture and preferences matter much more. And the success or failure of individual senior executive leaders is really about themselves and their ability to navigate the system.
You just heard Jason talk about what it really means to be a senior leader in the federal government and how little intentional investment there is in actual developing these leaders. Behind that perspective is a career spent inside the machinery of public service. In this episode of Life Between Titles, I talk with my friend Jason Briefel. Jason has spent more than a decade representing federal senior leaders, advising on workforce policy, civil service reform, and what it takes for the government to actually deliver for people. He has worked alongside the Senior Executives Association and other professional work groups, connecting the day-to-day reality of career public servants to lawmakers and policymakers who shape their world. We talk about the emotional toll of long job searches, what it felt like to move back in with his parents as a married adult while also trying to find work, and how that season affected his mental health. Jason shares how his current job search is different now that he has deep experience, real relationships, and more clarity on what he is good at and where he wants to contribute. We also get into his life outside of work, from seeing his favorite band, Widespread Panic, 115 times across 23 states with his wife, to taking his daughters to bluegrass festivals and teaching them how to move confidently through crowded spaces and unfamiliar communities. Underneath all of it is a through line of values, using his privilege in service of others, speaking plainly about what's broken, and trying to build coalition that can make government better. Here's my conversation with Jason Briefel. Let's get it. Welcome to Life Between Titles. I'm your host, Savan, and today I've got my friend Jason. Jason, how are you doing?
Doing great, Savan. Glad to be here today.
Awesome, man. Hey, before we get started, you sent me a list of tidbits about your life, and I wanted to ask you something that I thought was really important. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So you said that you and your wife have seen Widespread Panic 115 times together across 23 states. I can't say I've been committed to anything that hard in my life. Why did you do that? And how did it shape you?
Yeah, great questions. We happen to have common interests that
Hmm.
include traveling and experiential things as opposed to material things
Yep.
in life. And we have friends all around the country, both because we went to a smaller liberal arts college and we had a set of friends who were from everywhere.
Yep.
Now live all over the place. But we've also met people and made friends that I've been friends with now for over 20 years for some of them from going to see this band. And so having an excuse to go out and reconnect with friends, go do something really fun. And for me, what I like most about, the concert experience or any kind of experiential experience is really just trying to be there and in the moment and living for that time, that experience. And it's a band that has, I think, fairly deep lyrics, and they're also very good musicians. But it's really about that combination of the music and the words, the things that they're speaking to, speak to us. We're going out there and catching up with friends old and new, and making new ones all the time. And it's one of those things that we like spending our shared money on. Actually, this very morning, today at 10
Uh-huh.
a.m.,
Uh-huh.
we bought tickets for uh, they're headlining this All Good Festival in Columbia, Maryland next summer in July, a week after our what will be next year, our 14th wedding anniversary. Um, and we'll get to see them 2 days, 40 minutes from home. And I'm sure we'll have a
Wow.
bunch of friends there as well.
Have you memorized all the lyrics from the band?
They are, in addition to having their own awesome songs, they also sometimes are called, the world's greatest cover band. So there's also like a very deep repertoire of, rock, mostly rock songs, but also like funk and, stuff like that. A pretty wide array of other cover songs that they do really well. But yeah, the, there are some very impactful lyrics in the catalog.
Off top of your head, can you think of any you'd like to share?
Hmm. That is a good one. That's a hard one too. Um, so part of it isn't only just the individual songs. It's also sometimes the way that this band is like a band that every show is different, kind of like Grateful Dead style. So like every set list and every night is different. And the trying to interpret or talking with your friends afterward and interpreting like why did they make the arc of the songs go in that way through our experience or through being part of that show. Were they sending the audience collectively on a journey? Were they sending a message with individual lyrics or the way that they put it together? And then, of course, because everyone's coming to these things from wherever they're at in their life, the existential debates of which direction they were going, what it meant for you, or the differences in what different people took out of the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think that that's one of the most powerful and interesting things about music. A room of 10,000 people can hear the same things, and everyone has slightly different insights or reflections, or it's taking you back to a memory, or it's making a new memory. Um, and that really is part of it. And that's, uh, I find at live music concerts, that's where I get that kind of, this is what life is really, for like being fully in the moment and present.
Yep,
So I
for
didn't
sure.
answer your question about a favorite lyric because it probably changes all the time. My favorite song changes on the daily. Um, but a really good one is "You Should Be Glad." It's very funky, but really just um, the notion that you should be glad to be happy. You should be glad to be alive,
Yep,
and
that gratitude. I like that.
it's a big one. There are others about traveling. There are others about doing the things that we do. There are old friends, um, and it's I don't know. It's become the soundtrack of my life. I've now seen this band for more than half of the years that I have been alive. That's a funny thing to think about now that I just turned 40 a couple months ago.
Yeah, congrats. Congrats on that. You also mentioned that you take your kids to a lot of bluegrass festivals.
Yeah.
What are you hoping they get out of this experience?
So yeah, I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, both daughters. So full girl dad mode here.
Yeah,
And we take them most years. Memorial Day weekend, there's a great local bluegrass festival in Cumberland, Maryland called Del Fest. Del McCurry is a very famous bluegrass artist who started back with Bill Monroe. Back in the days, back in the '60s, he was in Bill Monroe's band for a few years. And this is another place where my brother and his sister almost always come to this event. They now live in Michigan, so this is a thing that they come back for many years. We have a mix of local friends, but also now like Delfest friends, like people who we literally see and camp with every year. Myself and my wife have gone like 13 or 14 times. Our kids have each been almost every year that they've been alive. And it's partially um, showing them that they can be kids but being in a community where we know enough about what's going on and feel safe enough to give them some freedom to be kids and to run around on their own. Now that they're old enough, we give them their own like walkie talkies and kind of send them on their way with their friend crew. So it really is about building some the other side of that is also the things you hope that they learn: personal responsibility. Not every stranger is trustworthy, but also, this is a community of folks who are generally pretty trustworthy. This is a place where you can go and have fun. They happen to either like or have gotten to like the music. So it's great that they um, have some bands that they like, and particularly some female artists.
hmm
I think
yeah,
for kids and particularly girls, like seeing people up on stage doing things is inspiring to them as they're trying to build confidence and think about what the things that they have passionate about and want to do in their lives.
yeah. I agree. I think there's something to be said about exposing your kids to communities and experiences that you can't just teach in a house on its own. And that was one of the hardest things during COVID. Was my daughter was in second grade, and I feel like she missed out on a full year and a half of like
Mhm.
that community experience, and just learning from going out and talking to people and hearing what they have to say and all those things. For you, as you're raising your two daughters and taking them to all these festivals, are you hoping that they are learning some of the things that you've learned as you've gone like 13 or 14 years to these festivals? What are you hoping that they get out of this experience?
Yeah. Well, they're coming because we want to go,
Well, they don't have a choice now,
and
right?
and they're going because we want to go. And luckily, I think that they have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you know,
Would you be devastated if they hated bluegrass?
no, no, and we are definitely getting to the age where, like, because of soccer tournaments or other things, we'll
Yeah.
see how we can keep the streak going or not with Delfest. But I think we don't want our kids sitting at home. We don't want to be sitting at home like playing video games all weekend, like looking at screens all weekend.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these are just getting out and learning how to interact with the world, getting exposed to art, getting exposed to community. My kids know how to navigate a crowd. So when we take them to say like a professional sporting event or like a community parade or something like that, like I don't have like the fear that my kid doesn't know
Right.
what to do if they get lost from me for a second, because they
Right.
absolutely know what to do and how
Right.
to get help. And so some of it is like building confidence as a parent to let your kid be a kid by um, giving them some exposure to experiences and environments that might be a little risky, but you measure your risks, you put them out there. We can't wrap our kids in a bubble all the time. So some of this is for us to push us. When we took them as a baby, for example, like infant, our friends were like blown away, blown away that we would have an infant at a 4-day camping festival. But like, it was fine. They just
Yeah.
strapped you. It's pretty easy. It's
Yeah.
harder
They're
when
not
you
doing
start
anything.
walking. A 2-year-old is way harder.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
so some of it is just you realize you have to give up a little bit of the part of the experience that you wanted to, or the late, the vacation piece of it. It's definitely work. Not saying it's easy, but I wouldn't want to just like leave them at home and go by myself. We certainly pick and choose the moments that we do that. Actually, like, widespread panic is like too loud for my kids. They don't really like them. And we were at one festival once that they were playing, and the kids were there, and like they were quite
Yeah.
dissatisfied. It was just too loud. It was like very aggressively loud rock and roll.
Right.
But like I know
Right.
that, and also like that's my time. That's
Yeah.
our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. But we're a family who likes to do many things as a family, and so these are some of the things that we do. And again, it is that mix of doing things as a family, but also often seeing other family members or friends in these. And sometimes we go to new places. Sometimes we go back to events that we've come to really love and get comfortable with.
Jason, tell me about where you grew up. You mentioned that you've been all over the country and you went to a small liberal arts school, but where did you grow up?
Yeah. So I grew up about 15 minutes from where I am now. So in Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
I went away for college to the University of Richmond in Virginia, and then came back, worked on the Hill for a little while, and then went down to North Carolina for grad school. I chased my then girlfriend down there when she got into grad school, and then got into a grad program myself.
Uh-huh.
But we came back here in 2011 when we both finished our graduate programs, and lived with my parents for 14 months. 14 months. That was a stressful time. That was my last major job search
Right.
before the one that I'm in the middle of right now.
Right. What was it like living with your folks? I've done that in my early 20s, and I'll tell you, for me, going back and living with my folks was very humbling and also just very suffocating. Like, I love my parents and I love all they do for me, but it was personally very suffocating. How was that for you? Especially, were you married already at that time?
So, yeah, this was post marriage. My wife was a new presidential management fellow in
Uh-huh.
a government job, and I spent most of that time that we lived with them, like 14 months, trying to find a full-time job. I had a couple part-time jobs, some paid and some unpaid, but otherwise it was uh, like quite a literally depressing time in my life. Like I had to go back on depression medication, and I started actually having panic attacks at the time because of the job search and the confluence of the pressure from my wife and my mom.
Yeah,
But they gave
I
us a lot
understand
of
that.
space. They gave us a lot of space. On the other hand, we were able to chunk some money away, and put some down payment for a future rental. Like once I finally got a job, we quickly moved on out of there. So
Yeah.
um they were as supportive as they could be. I'm sure it was not ideal for everyone, mostly because of me. It worked out fine. We watched. There was a big renovation while we were there, and so we like locked ourselves in the bedroom and watched the whole the whole
Oh,
Wire
yeah.
series.
That arguably is the best show that's ever been made.
Yeah,
Arguably. Yeah.
uh, it it is an amazing program. So yeah, and they were very supportive. I'm very lucky to um, have people in my life who deal with sometimes the BS that I put out there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things when you're going through these job searches, it's the hardest thing, at least for me, is that lack of clarity of when it'll end. As a person who likes to plan things and check things off and do those things, that was definitely the hardest part for me. For you, you mentioned that you were depressed and had anxiety during this time. What do you think was like the hardest part for you?
Yeah, part of what was exceptionally challenging during that prior job search, so this was like in 2011 into 2012, was getting really close multiple times, but not getting the job. So like I was the second choice candidate for four different hiring actions. And so like knowing that you've been through multiple rounds and that you're pretty competitive and then
Hmm.
not being picked, but then like no one being willing to provide any feedback whatsoever, like at all,
Yeah.
in any way at all,
Yeah.
um, made it really hard to figure out like what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do differently? It made it hard to keep or build self confidence. You know, by the end, I kind of was just like, well, I just kind of system. By the end, I kind of put my feelings aside or buried them with the medicine, and then just like was a machine of just like cranking stuff, and it just became a pure numbers game. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna do 10 a day, no matter what, no matter how hard I try on them or not, and just treat it like that.
Right. Do
Did
you
that
think
work?
that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna
But
say, do you think that technique worked during your first unemployment experience? And I think maybe we could dive into this a little bit deeper later, but I'd love to know sort of what you're doing differently this time around
yeah,
versus that first time.
yeah. I don't know that it worked, although one of the randomly found jobs that I had applied to became the job that I got and then had for 13 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that I found and was just like, well, this seems like I could do it. And I didn't know exactly what the work was. It was just like a general policy analyst, you know, special assistant kind of like bottom floor policy job.
Hmm.
Like, sure, at a law firm. Like, whatever, I can do that.
Right.
Um, and it just worked out. But like when I applied to it, I had no idea that there was anything interesting or special or unique about it. And luckily, I had a great boss, you know, there who hired me, who I, you know, worked with for many years and continues to be a mentor and friend. It really
Yeah.
lucked out.
It's amazing how things work out. And it's always those opportunities that you never see coming. At least for me, I mean, I feel like every time I go into an interview and I think I do well, I never actually move forward with it. But the ones where I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna go and walk through it, somehow always works out better for some reason. And I don't know if that's just like a sign from God or whatever, being you believe in, but it's definitely plays a lot of tricks on your psyche because then you don't know what to expect, right? With these
Right.
experiences.
Yeah. I'm curious, did you pursue when you were at the Pentagon recently, did you pursue that or did you get reached out to on that?
No, I feel like one of the things that has been fortunate for me is there's always been uh, a group of people that I've leaned on, and this was right after Rebellion Defense, where they had a massive layoff, and I was unemployed. I was just trying to figure out like what I want to do next, and I just talked to people, and one of the people I talked to was John Sherman, who was a CIO at the time, and he said, "Hey, like you want to come back in and do this?" And I feel like those are the best jobs I've had, are the ones where I've sort of had that natural connection already, and there isn't like this preconceived notion of what that role should be. It's really sort of tailored to the person and what they can bring, and I feel like those are my successful jobs at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And you asked what's different now that I'm searching, you know,
Yeah.
after, you know, legitimate over a decade of professional experience, and entrenched, you know, relationships, you know, across the space in town. It is like obviously very different for a lot of those reasons, you know. On one hand, my search previously, you know, a decade or more ago was fresh out of grad school.
Right.
I had had some random jobs. I hadn't even really had any professional jobs. I worked like landscaping during college just to make money because I didn't really
Hmm.
care.
Hmm.
And so I didn't really have a direction other than just know I wanted to be doing some kind of policy or policy adjacent work. You know,
Right.
now in my current search that I'm in, and I was looking before my job ended as well, is a combination of I know the things that I'm good at. I know the people that I know. I see some of the gaps in the things that, could be exciting to do or try to get after. Um, but also, I've also been trying to not bake the pie or bake the vision of what the next phase could look like to look exactly like what I might be best positioned to do right now or what I was doing before. So I'm trying to kind of keep open opportunities and possibilities of going in a different direction, but like leveraging my skills and the experiences that I have. And it's admittedly hard to do that, in part because one, doubling down on the places that I've been and the networks that I know, I feel like I could make the most impact potentially,
Mhm.
hitting the
Mhm.
ground wise. But like, would I grow the most as a leader, as a person, as a
Right.
worker? I think I know that the answer is probably not. But also, maybe if I'm in a bigger organization with resources and support, if I'm working with still other peers, like I'm someone who always learns from the people that I'm working around. That's also just part of my personality is I like understanding how the whole thing works. I like kind of like getting down to the ground level and then building up and kind of scaffolding my understanding on how things work now and how they could be better, different in the future. And I think we are in a big kind of inflection point moment in our economy, in our country, everything else. And um I haven't used AI all the time. Is that going to be the death knell of me? I'm not sure. Like, synthesizing a lot of disparate information into like a coherent understanding was always like my one of my core skills coming out of being a history major in undergrad and my later graduate work, and part of why I'm so effective as like a policy advocate. Now you can just like pop a bunch of documents and stuff into a
Yeah.
GPT or an LLM and it kicks those things out for you. But I still know and have to believe and have to figure out how to make it a selling point for myself that like the human insights, the like how do you use relationships to advance ideas? How do we build momentum around ideas with other people? Um, like I don't think AI can do that. And
I
and
agree.
hopefully I'm right. So hopefully that means there's still a role for people who do kind of relationship driven, bridging and bonding and trying to build something different toward the future.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think AI is gonna replace the human connection. I mean, AI will replace a lot of things, but that human connection piece is definitely one that I don't think it'll ever replace. Jason, I want to maybe touch on some of the challenges you've had. Now, I'll give you an example of the challenges I've seen through my conversations and personal experiences. But as you go from this person who has graduated uh, college, getting an advanced degree, and then finding that job, I think there are certain roadblocks and challenges that you have there that I don't think you'll have now that you're more seasoned. Do you feel like some of the things that you're running into now that you've got a decade of experience, and you're looking for more senior roles, do you feel like that's harder than what you had before when you were unemployed for 14 months? Or do you think it's easier now that you've made those connections and have that experience?
I mean, I certainly feel much more confident and far less like alone
Yeah.
in the search. I have people in my network and colleagues and mentors who are continuing to actively like reach out, ask how things are going, help look at my materials. Some of them are even open to doing, prep for interviews or other, looking at stuff. So for me, it's all about confidence. Like it's all about self confidence, most specifically. And so having those cheerleaders and having people like saying like you're going to get there, knowing other colleagues who have also had employment disruption this year, who have said, you know, sometimes I didn't hear anything for months, but then like 3 4 months later you'll hear a gusher of responses, and some of them are finally, you know, starting to get employed, you know, 9 10 months later. So hearing kind of just what people are experiencing and getting some feedback about what I'm up to, I think has helped me stay focused and not yet get demoralized or discouraged that I'm on the wrong path. Like I've had one virtual interview in like less than 2 months of actively applying to stuff. So that's not amazing, but I know that it's better than other people who are just facing a void of just
Yeah.
hearing nothing at all.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, one thing I am finding is a bit more challenging, is especially some of the senior level jobs that I'm looking at are looking for multiple skill sets that I usually check some of the boxes of, but there's often like one piece that I just don't have the experience around. But and sometimes I know that I could do it, and if I know I can do it, I usually will still apply and kind of write to I can learn those things. But if it's like if they say if the posting articulates that there's not the bandwidth or the timeline for that, if they're not, you know, you read these language and all these jobs and you get a sense of the company culture of, is it just go go go, or do we want employees who can be successful here for longer than 6 months or a year? Um, and we're going to help them be successful. And if you don't hit every box, you do so. But, you know, one related thing to that, so there's the did I do things or not? The other piece is like the specific metrics around impact and like measurement and like, you know, did you put a system of in place to do these things? And the reality of my work experience is I worked for, you know, small nonprofits that were not mega rigorous in the way that they went about doing their work. And so it's like I understand why you would want to have measures and metrics around things that you're doing, but like, do I have experience as a leader putting in place a system of measurement for a set of operations? Oh, could I do that with some, you know, competent people supporting me? Sure. But I just that feels like one of just, you know, the work that I did, or whether we got the policy outcome or not, was like the only thing that my clients were ever paying attention to. They weren't saying, oh, you know, they had no means, regardless of how to document that. So that's just something I'm trying to figure out how to speak to, where I might get that experience in other places, um, or whether maybe my experience is more common than some of these jobs that expect people who have worked in these like perfect bureaucracies to bring that experience to the table.
I feel like, there's a mix of these job openings that are unrealistic. Somebody will write, "Hey, I want 20 years of AI," where it's like, well, I don't think we've had 20 years
Right,
of AI
right.
that's been out there, right? So I think there's a mix of that, but I also believe this is Savann's personal hot take. I also believe that there's for most of the jobs, as long as you're hitting a majority of the qualifications, you're going to learn the rest of it, on the job. I'll say, like, for me personally, I've learned so much in terms of the breadth of things that I know now on the job, whether it's how to read a P&L, how policy works, how do you sort of, go through and figure out what gets funded or not in the DoD. I mean, they don't teach you that in school. There's no class for that type of stuff. And so, there's a certain amount of unrealistic expectations, I think, when people put out these job openings. But I also think, like, as a person looking for work, um, generally speaking, there should just be like a, fuck it attitude, right? It's like, fuck it. Like, I can probably do most of this stuff. And then the rest of it, I'll just figure out, I've got here already. I've been doing this for 10 years. Like, there's no reason why you can't do something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the calculus that goes through my head as I'm trying to decide whether it's worth spending the time on applying to something that might feel
Yeah.
a little bit farther afield or a little bit more of a stretch. It's like, is it interesting work? Is it an interesting organization? Does it
Yeah.
sound exciting? I might be willing to do it, but if it's like there's no way I could be successful and there's no way that I'm going to get to talk to somebody, get to that
Yeah.
interview phase, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to I'm not going to spend the time going through that chat GPT rodeo of playing the AI apocalypse to update my resume and cover letter to
Yeah.
meet all their keywords.
Yeah.
And that's
Agreed.
been a whole thing, right? Like using these technologies to help, but trying to maintain some semblance of yourself. And actually, like when you look at the paper, it still feels and reads like you. And I find that to be a challenge, but I'm getting better. Some of it is just um, letting go. No cover letter
Hmm.
is going to be perfect, and at the end of the day, it only matters so far.
Yeah. Agreed. Jason, tell me about you've worked supporting the government in some capacity or other over the last 10 years. Tell me about sort of like when that started. You mentioned that you had done work with the House of Representatives early on, and your work,
Yeah,
now your latest position now. But tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. So I've always been someone who's interested in um, kind of like where the rubber meets the road on policy. So not so much the politics side, but more public administration or early implementation. And so
Yeah,
broadly, I'm someone who thinks that like we should have a government. Its role is to fill those gaps in our society, but like boy, we probably could do like way, way, way better than we
yeah,
are.
yeah,
Um, and so I was lucky enough to land at a federal employment practice law firm that represented government managers and government senior executives and other professional employees. Um, so the job I landed in for the past 13 years was a place that kind of that frame. I could apply it to each of the clients or the different work streams that I had um, at the firm, and that was kind of the type of energy that I brought to the table for my clients. Like, sure, I was representing them, but I was representing them in service of this bigger idea of like, government has to be able to deliver. Because if
yeah,
we already have a trust problem, and if we continue
yeah,
saying that we're going to do something but not delivering, the people that I represented, career civil servants, are the people who suffered, have been left behind and cut out, and certainly are feeling the repercussions of the Trump administration. But
yeah,
I was one of among the people in DC who saw this coming for a long time and tried to help get in front of it by saying like we need to update the way that we manage the civil service, the way that we manage government, the way that we procure and use digital tools. Um, but a lot of times what I saw was we skipped over the basics and we went to higher level, more difficult activities, and we eventually
yeah,
fell on our faces. And
yeah.
so,
Well, we
there's a
also
lot of
get
lessons
we
in
also
that.
get infatuated with these shiny toys that come out,
Yeah,
and we forget about some of the basic things that we've already agreed to in terms of
yeah.
delivering.
It's working around the federal government. The world's largest bureaucracy has certainly taught me a lot about, I guess, the human condition
Yeah.
and in all ways. And I also one of the things that was actually a kind of a fun sidetrack that really has informed how I think about this stuff is I ran the professional development for the Senior Executives Association for like 7 or 8 years, including planning a bunch of their major annual leadership conferences and other programs and stuff. And so got to work with like world class leadership people. I
Hmm.
recruited Amy Edmondson for a session at a conference, and she did a fireside chat session with Jen Easterly, the former head of
Yeah.
CISA.
Yeah.
Um,
She's fantastic.
and this idea that like we need leaders to bring people along through change.
Hmm.
And what I've learned about technology is, like, 90% of technology change initiatives fail because we don't pay enough attention to the people and the change management stuff. And so, like, having that understanding that comes from, like, organizational development and, like, leader development, and thinking about it in this policy context where you have all these people who want to change the way that government programs and government operations work, but they go about doing so through a procurement lever as opposed to, like, a training their workforce lever. I always thought was chasing the wrong solution in the wrong path, but I also understand why, because in the political economy, who's giving money to policymakers? It's the vendors on the outside who have an awesome, shiny solution. And that solution truly could help. But as I'm sure you have seen through your experience, we don't always get the full value of those solutions because we don't bother to spend enough time and effort on bringing our own people along, and just paying folks on the outside. Maybe they're competent and capable, maybe they're even mission aligned, still more expensive for the taxpayer.
Yep. I
and
mean, it comes
and
down to the intention
yeah.
of what it is that they're trying to get done. And I would argue that there's many times where the pendulum has definitely swung back and forth between sort of this massive investment in vendors to then trying to bake in the talent in house and train people and hire people for those roles. And now I think it's maybe swinging back the other way. And it's gone back and forth so many times. But the thing that I personally think has been horrendous for us is that we don't stay the course. Like, regardless of sort of how you feel of the investments, because the administrations change and leadership changes so quickly, the investments we make never see any type of fruit. And the taxpayers end up eventually paying for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, and I do take some solace and pleasure in being the, like, "I told you so" guy. But, like
Me
but
too.
like, it doesn't actually help anything, it doesn't solve anything. And, kind of as I'm thinking about what comes next, it is like, how do we bring these insights and understandings up the food chain to the policymakers who really, I think, just aren't
Yeah.
seeing this, and continue to do things in the way that they know how to do them, but are getting us to this place. And I do think it starts with not thinking with the end in mind. Like, what outcomes do we want?
Yep.
And like,
Yep.
I'm someone who thinks that, like, our political discourse is so challenging because we have no articulated or articulable, like, national goals or values. Like, where do we want the United States of America to go? Where do we not want it to go? How do we get there together? No one is even like, I don't hear very many politicians or other people talking or thinking like that, but I know that we have a lot more in common than we do
Absolutely.
different, and we have to keep
Absolutely.
figuring out ways to lean into those things, and sometimes put our ego aside in pursuit of that common good.
Yeah. Jason, I want to take two clicks out or two steps back. And for the listeners, we've got a wide variety of different types of people listening to this podcast. But for the listeners that don't have experience in the federal government or supporting the federal government, I want to maybe frame what you've done so far in your career and what that looks like. And maybe we could start off by your interpretation of what policy is and does for us as citizens. How would you define what that is?
Yeah. Um, so it's an interesting question. So policy is. I mean, I guess policy is a couple different things. It could be laws. It could be regulations. Usually regulations are an action that a government agency takes to use authority that was granted to it by lawmakers to fill in gaps around some issue. And I differentiate these two things specifically in part because who is responsible for them, who owns them. and therefore who is your audience, or who's changes. It may be your members in Congress. It could be a government agency or organization. Those, regardless of what those rules or policies are, they're going to dictate how you go down the road. So if you're a small business, there are employment rules, there are taxation rules, there are cybersecurity things that you need to be paying attention to. Um, when we talk about red tape in our society, and when we talk about burdens that are particularly being put on businesses and stuff, often people are thinking of a government policy because there was some mandate that was um, trying to prevent something bad from happening again, or trying to put some safeguards in our system so that the bad guys can't get away with doing things nefarious. And so that's kind of just like the infrastructure of policy. How does it get enacted on a day to day? That's where you have enforcement mechanisms, certain agencies who are looking to see if people have violated those policies, are adhered to them, on kind of the audit and inspector general side. And, you know, a lot of our policies were written a long time ago. And
Yeah,
and
true.
part of the challenge, certainly at the federal level, but probably everywhere, is, you know, um, we're operating under a set of rules and policies that come from a long time ago that might have been relevant then
Mhm.
and may or may not be relevant now. But they're still on the books. And the question is, which ones need to be changed? Um, and who cares about changing which ones? Sometimes we see a lot of effort and energy around things, issue-based things that people care about a lot,
Mhm.
whether it's abortion or climate or whatever. Name your issue under the sun. And there's a whole ecosystem of organizations and entities who might educate policymakers about those things, might get people organized on a grassroots basis to call their members, or to go rally in the streets with signs and what have you, or to write to their local media. At the end of the day, we live in a democratic republic. So we elect representatives to go and carry our viewpoints to the best of their ability, um, in the places that they're elected to serve in. And um, they're struggling with those things. But part of the challenge, I think, at our policy ecosystem is there's a lot of entrenched and longstanding interests who care about the old ways, and who often probably built a whole business model
Yep.
around the old ways. And you're always going to have new ideas, new businesses, new innovation coming in, bumping up against that and
Right.
trying to fill the gaps that aren't being filled. Or if there's a profitable new opportunity, like with all of this technology stuff that's driving this, I think all economic growth in the country right now is being driven by AI investment.
I
um,
agree with you.
period. Like,
I agree with you.
period. There is no other thing driving the economy right now. Um, that's really risky for all of us and for policymakers who are weighing those trade offs. What is the economy? Is the economy the stock market? What if I told you that only a fraction of Americans actually participate in the stock market? Is that
Mhm.
really the economy? Or is it the reality that like 40% of Americans don't have $400 of savings in their bank account in case an emergency happens? And is that really what the economy looks like? And I bring these things up in part, especially because from DC, we've had some major economic $1 trillion plus bills passed in the past several
Yeah.
years, including
A
this year
a
with the
a
tax
big
bill,
beautiful one. A big
including the
beautiful
big,
one.
beautiful one. But like, what
Yeah.
were some of the things that were the center of that debate that didn't affect most normal people? Things like the salt tax that affects, New York and New Jersey and California, basically rich people who live in those handful of states, was like the major sticking point for that $1 trillion bill. Not that it doesn't matter for the residents in those areas who want to be able to deduct that money and take advantage of that federal policy, but the things that we focus on in our policy discourse often are influenced by the loudest voices, the most well-funded voices, and usually rich people. We talk about things that rich people care about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because they know which levers to pull, right? To be able to raise their voice to uh, a point where it's being heard. And I feel like most Americans don't know what those levers are and don't know how to actually engage in a way that can be effective to enact some sort of change
Right.
when it
And
comes
I
to
think
stuff
that
like
that's
that.
why President Trump was elected twice, because Americans didn't feel like the system was serving them and their interests. And and he said he was going to do something different about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly why any president's elected, right? You feel like they sort of have the best interest of the American people, at least the ones that have voted for them, at heart, and whether or not they deliver on those things, you know, you could
That's
argue
always fodder
either
for the
way.
next election.
Yeah. Jason, we started off very, very vague in describing what policies are. How would you describe your life's work, at least the last 10 years, um, and how that directly sort of supports this idea of what policy is? Like, what did you do specifically?
Yeah. So specifically, I was a lobbyist for federal employee professional
Yeah.
associations.
By the way, just a quick aside, I was talking to my wife about our conversation today. I said, "Hey, I'm going to talk to my friend Jason. He's a lobbyist." And she said, "Well, I think they call themselves advocates now because lobbyists are that word is, I guess, has a certain connotation to it."
Sure.
What does that mean? And is that true?
The word absolutely has a connotation, but like it's not something that I'm afraid of. And I actually am like happy to introduce myself to people that way. I've
Uh huh.
had this conversation over, at holiday dinner tables with my wife's family and
Yeah.
stuff, down in the
Yeah.
South. And, the reality is, um, petitioning the government to, redress your grievances is a constitutionally guaranteed First Amendment free speech activity. And so that's one of the great things about America is that everyone who's here um, has the right to go and share your views with your elected officials about what's
Mm-hmm.
happening with your government that's funded by your taxpayer money. Um, and so I'm glad that I have worked for, mission driven organizations representing employees that I felt good about representing. Like I said earlier, I'm someone who believes that we should have a government that it fills important roles, but that we can do better. And so the various federal employee groups and professional associations that I got to represent gave me a platform for bringing that kind of value set and ethos to the issues that they worked on. And so some of them cut across the board. I represented government senior executives. So a lot of big picture management issues and workforce reform, what we call in this
Mm-hmm.
space civil service reform. We haven't updated the rules for how we manage the government workforce really since the Carter administration, 1978.
Wow.
Um, I also represented IRS managers, during a time where the agency, was dudded over the past 10 years. And then during the Biden administration, started to rebuild capacity in the ability of the agency and its employees to actually fulfill their mission and their policy mandates to serve the American people and business
Mm-hmm.
community. And, I know that there was great pride of the workers there where they were actually able to answer the phones for the first times in years. Their customer service, and answering phones, for example, was like in the 10 to 20% range. And they got it to like the 80 to 90% answering a phone call in less than 3 minutes in like a couple years with some investment and some dedicated attention. And like, why does that matter? It's because everyone who doesn't like paying their taxes still deserves someone to answer their questions when they have one and weren't able to do so. But through no fault of the workers at that agency, it was because of Congress cutting their budget and intentionally trying to break it. But, you know, We already don't collect $690 billion a year, every single year, that are due in taxes because we have decimated the IRS's ability to collect that. And I find that really
Mm,
a data point I want to share here because we already we already have all the money that we could need and use owed to the federal government on the books. We're just not willing to go about collecting it. And so it's frustrating to see policymakers talking about new taxes or changing the tax code when we're really not like enforcing the existing code or collecting what's already due.
right.
Um, and like, I was just representing these poor workers, frontline IRS workers make less than frontline McDonald's workers, just to
Mm,
put in perspective, why it's hard
yeah.
to change some of where these things are going as we digitize them is that the frontline staff are getting decimated. Um, so my life's work was understanding the real issues, or my life's work. What I've been doing this past time is really sitting with and being with these populations of workers to understand what their real challenges are,
Yeah.
and then trying to advance policies, trying to get them in the right rooms and the right coalitions with other organizations who could help advance that conversation. No one really cared what just some group of federal workers says. But if in that IRS example, if we could bring IRS managers to the tax professional community who are also frustrated about their interactions with the service, but we can find common ground around workforce investment so that you can get service, or standing up a dedicated line for tax professionals so that they can get through, which was done a few years ago as well. Um, then you can build political power, political support, because how do you link arms with others who are trying to take your issues to a better place? Um, so trying to both kind of ground myself in what the real problems are instead of the surface level problems, and then finding friends who could help do something about it, or trying to.
Yeah.
So building coalitions, inviting ourselves into existing ones, trying to find where that overlap of our Venn diagram and the Venn diagram of others comes, and then being like, here's this perspective that you have probably been missing, that we can help, and trying to use that to drive forward a more well-informed conversation, but also try to broaden the base of political interest so that we're more likely of actually getting somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, what you talk about is such a fundamental miss and a fundamental thing that that in your example, the IRS, through it sounds like through no fault of their own, because they've either been gutted and then reinvested in, and then gutted again and then reinvested in, and it sounds like there's just a lot there that the organization is having challenges with over these last couple years, couple decades, one could argue. Why do you think the government has such a hard time doing these basic things? Because, like, the way you describe it, I'm, those are fundamental jobs that that organization needs to do, but it sounds like they have trouble with it. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of reasons. I think we got here over time, so this has been happening for a long time. But,
Yeah,
I do think that the push toward outsourcing, which started, I guess, in the Carter and Reagan administrations, and then has continued, without abatement, regardless of political party since then, is a big part of it. And this isn't like a knock on vendors, but I do think that we've outsourced our ability to strategically plan and strategically think and to critically think as
yeah.
government bureaucrats and workers.
I 100% agree.
And like, I literally was in a meeting a couple of years ago with a bunch of government and industry senior executives where someone from a cabinet agency was like, I'll tell you what our updated strategic plan is once X vendor delivers it to us. And so like, and not only are those vendors doing that work for the agency, they also have lobbyists who are
Uh-huh.
in OMB, are in the secretary's office, and then are working on Capitol Hill maybe pushing toward that policy solution, but maybe pushing in a different ball in a totally another direction.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
so what I know to be true, but what I'm not sure that, senior executives and other government bureaucrats really fully understand is how everyone else is playing the game all around them, and they're just like trapped in this burning building trying to do their job. And and they do it to the best of their ability through no fault of their own. But and we've compartmentalized the ownership on the career civil servant side of these things so much that there isn't meaningful accountability for the outcomes. Whether it is holding a vendor to actually building the thing that you wanted them to on the
Yeah.
time and schedule that you wanted. I am, because of my experience with senior executives and the lack of fundamental training and investment that agencies make in them, I also think that we have, leaders directing and buying and leading things that they don't fully understand. Um, and that can be okay if they're learning, but are their vendors or their partners or others around them um, actually bringing them along in the way that they need to be, or are they just keeping them on a treadmill with a carrot tied to the front of their head, dangling in front of their face, and that's all they see?
Yeah, I wanna ask you about the Senior Executive Association because I've got um, a vested interest in knowing more about this.
Yeah.
And I wasn't part of the SES staff, and as an HQE, we're not part of the GS band, but we're sort of like this, this bastard kid that's just off in this corner that has the responsibilities of SESs, but also doesn't have the perks of them, right? Because we're there only for a handful of years. We can't manage anybody directly, so we don't have authority over people. And we could be fired at will at any given time, unlike SESs, which takes a little bit more work to fire
Yeah.
incompetent ones. Um, your work at the SEA, is it the C or the SEA? How do you guys
So
describe it?
I and many others have always said SEA. There are some people who say C, but I think
Okay.
SEA is what I would what I recommend. And so the law firm that I worked at actually was founded by Jerry Shaw, who was an IRS lawyer who became an SES and then left the IRS when it got all created and helped found the association. So
Okay,
that's
yeah. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's great because my experience working with my colleagues has been, how do I put this? A little all over the place. I think there's some that do an exceptionally great job, and others where I'm like, how the hell did you get here?
yes,
and and
fully.
and so for you, as you were, I believe, the interim president of policy there, what do you think SESs need that they don't have right now? Because I would argue that in order for somebody to get there, and for the audience that doesn't know about these rankings, like an SES typically has years of experience either in industry or in government in some capacity, and has gone through a pretty rigorous set of things for you to even apply to get to be an SES. And so it's not like a light, promotion by any means. But I also think that the things that they have to do sort of get them to a point where they should be competent at their jobs. Your association, when you were president, what were you helping them out with that they weren't getting already?
Yeah. So I had a bunch of different jobs with the Senior Executives Association. They were one of my main clients at the law firm for about a year in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was also the paid staff interim president of the association when I had
Mm-hmm.
a less than 1 year old baby at the house. Um, that was probably the craziest time of my life so far. But so the Senior Executives Association is a professional association that represents senior career leaders in the government. I think you described kind of the level that they're at. These are your senior vice president level kind of people in
Mm-hmm.
industry. There's about 10,000 of them across the entire federal government. Most of them are career federal workers, although there's some that are political appointees or are limited term. And then there are a lot of other senior type of staff, like the HQEs that you mentioned, Savan, who have different roles and purposes. And to me, um, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, the government's personnel office, would always say it's not our job to think about or even know about all those other types of appointment
Permutations.
authorities that are
Yeah.
outside of Title V, which is the civilian core civilian part of federal employment. But there are hundreds of thousands of non Title V employees within the Defense Department, among other agencies. So one of them is so we have this classification for executive level leaders. I basically see it as a pay system because other than that, we're not. Um, there is no strategic or thoughtful development program in any agency or across the government um, for these people to build an actual cadre of leaders who have some common management and leadership understandings. Like they share a language around executive leadership and a culture around executive leadership. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I think you see is that there's all these variations agency by agency where the agency culture and preferences matter much more. And the success or failure of individual senior executive leaders is really about themselves and their ability to navigate the system. It's not actually like an outcome of we, the employer, or we, the agency, are intentionally building and finding the best leaders we can. Some of that's
Mm-hmm.
policy failure, the set of policies that deal with government supervisors and managers, and the
Mm-hmm.
set of policies around executive leadership and for these SESers have nothing to do with one another. It's not like a step ladder. Um, they're two different paths. And I think more broadly, the government hasn't prioritized, public service leadership as a discipline and as a unique job and focus on that whole managerial cadre. And so civil service reform, big picture civil service reform was the thing that we tried advancing the most and I did the most work on at the association. And of course, there were pieces of targeted reform around the senior executive service. When I started at the law firm back in 2012, there was actually bicameral legislation to do so, and lost some congressional champions there. But it's kind of a systemic issue, I think, for the whole government. And then even in a place like DoD, DoD has more personnel authorities that it generally misuses and mismanages than it knows what to do with. And yet it simultaneously goes and asks Capitol Hill for new personnel authorities every single year in the National Defense
Oh,
Authorization.
the irony.
And it's mostly because they're not really that serious about talent management. Um, in general, and I've got to think, I can't not think that it's in part because talent management is hard when you have no budget predictability, and we haven't had a budget on time since 1997, and because in-house funds, those funds that we're investing in our own staff, if we don't spend them all by the end of the year in the government, they can be
It goes
repurposed
away.
toward other things. Whereas if there's a vendor who could help you with something over the next 5 years and you obligate
Yep.
those funds, well,
Yep.
that money is locked up. And so
Yep.
there are some design constraints that I think really disincentivize doing all of the hard things that we need to do right by our people, the government workers, and particularly our leaders, because it's often easier, more politically acceptable, if not appreciated. And there's so much energy about going out the door. I look at the professions that Congress has decided merit a law that says that people need to have certain basic professional credentials and uh, uh, capability versus those that don't. And the ones that we've professionalized are for all the things that send money out the door: acquisition, financial management, cybersecurity. Um, what are the things that we have never professionalized and we don't want to have people going to these events and activities all the time? HR, management, executive leadership. So
Interesting.
it's just all we're just skipping over the basics of
Yeah.
people management, the basics of
Yeah, I
organization.
agree with you. I mean, the civilian workforce is so massive, and I think with the service members, we do a better job of upskilling them, and it's because there's a lot more rigor around expectations, and there's a lot more clarity around, as you get promoted, here's the things you got to do, here are the check boxes, and they actually give you the opportunities to get better. But on the civilian side, there isn't anything like that whatsoever. And I would argue that the things that they try to do, which is a lot of online classes or watch a video and answer these questions, and then now you're smarter about things like, I don't know, cybersecurity or HR or things not to do because it's going to be sexual harassment. And it's like the government at times do these things just so they don't get in trouble versus doing them because there is an advantage to making sure that your people are upskilled.
Yeah, and there's Jen Palka, among others, has done a lot of
Yeah.
thinking in recent years on this,
Yep. For
procedure
sure.
fetish and this focus on compliance over outcomes. And you asked, like, how do some of these senior executives get to where they get? It's because they know how to play the game.
Yep.
Some of them are like the most amazing people that you've ever met and deal with tremendous amounts of brain damage getting the outcomes that they drive their organizations to do so. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that those people are in the minority, and usually it's because of their own sheer force of will and personality,
Mm-hmm.
not like how the organization has set them up for success or not.
Right.
Um,
I mean,
and
you get a couple allies and you get a couple wins under your belt, and you can do a lot in
yeah,
the government. You could do a lot.
yeah,
Whether
but
you're capable of doing what's needed in the future is different than being able to tell that story now and being able to position yourself to take advantage of
yeah.
those opportunities.
Well, I think it is interesting right now because so much is changing, and particularly how technology and data and everything is changing, like what is possible and what's not possible, from just being like a pure fiction to like maybe some of these things we could actually do is
Yep.
the like how much basic digital and technical literacy do all of our employees have? Just do our senior staff have? How do we lean into those things more? How do we make them priorities? Not just check the boxes, but like this is like something we really need to do. Um, and interestingly, like if I'm curious, and I think we'll see how it may or may not play out. If some of the like tenured senior leaders aren't willing to get on board with some of that stuff, is their deputy or the person behind that deputy going to be the person who might fleet up and jump over someone because they have a mix of some of those technical skills, but also perhaps more emotional intelligence and social and relational skills that I think are really critical. And that's what I see coming out of a lot of the leadership literature is like human skills are going to be more and more and more and more essential the farther we go into technology taking everything over.
I completely agree. And if we had another podcast, we could definitely dive into that. But I think those soft skills are something that are not trained well, that we don't have easy access to, and we don't have opportunities to practice them in a safe way. But yeah, that's definitely another podcast altogether. We could dive into that pretty deep. Jason, I want to spend the last third of our conversation talking about some of the things that you think you did very well over the last 10 years. What's an accomplishment or two that you're super proud of that you want to tell the world about?
Yeah. So it's funny. I don't show up to work for myself. Like
Hmm.
I'm the last person that I think about. I'm not doing this, because I want to bring Jason glory.
Hmm.
Not even necessarily doing it because I want to bring my clients glory, although that is like obviously part of the job.
Right.
For me, it really is like the relationships and helping advance people's careers and ideas, and like people like folks who have been more junior, folks who I've been able to like help pull through and get to another place in their career, whether they're like colleagues, or folks on my staff. I had a deputy who worked with me for 6 years, Natalia, while she went to full time law school at night at George Mason University. Um, just seeing like the personal growth, but also like the growth that she helped me with, by having a sounding board within the office, on all of the things that we did. Like I grew and she grew, and like she went on to clerk for a federal judge after working for us. She graduated near the top of her class, and she just started like last month starting work at a big law firm in New York City. And so like really like we met, Natalia and I met, at an event on Capitol Hill where I was giving a presentation, and she was like a low level staffer at a nonprofit who had been sent to go listen to this lunch and learn.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then I was able to hire her, and like we were thick as thieves for the 6 years we worked together. So for me, like those are the things that I remember, because it's not just like a point in time. Like we did lots of great work together for our clients, but it was really, I think we both grew as people. From we both had very different political perspectives that we came to the world with, but I also think that that's what made us an effective team in DC. I was this much more kind of liberal, democratic leaning person, and she, came from a pretty far deep in the right, but wasn't exactly like a MAGA person. And, and having those two perspectives in service of our clients while navigating all these policy things in DC, it made me a better advocate. It opened my eyes to things that I otherwise might have, poo pooed or turned away from. And um, it, it, so, so work, she made me better. I think I made her better too.
Yeah.
And for me, like that's,
Especially in your line of work, that diversity is probably so important, right? Like to be able to think through critically all the different angles,
yeah,
I
I
would
mean, that's how
imagine
we
is important.
wanted to approach the work. It's part of how we thought we had to approach the work, because we didn't have, we represented small organizations with no political action committee or tools like that. And so how did we, move the needle for them, or how were we effective in representing them? It was, we knew our stuff, we understood the political dynamics, and we tried to be helpful and jump in, when we had a chance of making some progress, and otherwise we held fire. So that, but understanding some of the political dynamics, particularly things that were bubbling up on the right at the time, um, helped us kind of apply some foresight and to think about like where are things going, not just where are they right now.
Yeah.
um
How did you guys work together? I mean, just for the audience that's living in an environment that has maybe pretty different perspectives of what the world should look like. How did you and Natalia work together well?
yeah
Because it sounded like you
so
guys were good colleagues.
yeah so we did have an office in DC. We were there most days, but not all the time. Luckily we had a few years under our belt before COVID hit, which certainly changed the dynamic of outreach and doing policy work in DC, but not really how we worked with one another, mostly because we had already established, some means and ways of doing that. But one of the things that she, one of the things she gave me was like a glass bowl for Jason's bright ideas. Um, and I use scare quotes because my bright ideas were not always bright ideas, but sometimes they
Dull
really were.
ideas.
Sometimes they really were. But I think
Uh-huh.
like having colleagues that you can kind of do blue sky thinking of around, the work that you're doing, and trying to be like, let's be as outrageous as we can be, and then start coming down to earth, and then like what actually makes sense. Having the trust and having a really smart partner who doesn't come at the world and issues in the same way that you do, um, you know, made me a lot better in many ways. And we did do that in person a lot of times. Sometimes it was on the metro when we're going up to a meeting, or when we're coming away from a meeting, with a policymaker or staffer. But I don't know. I think it's really important, I think, to have that kind of psychological safety, um, with your peers and your colleagues at work.
Yep.
I
Agreed.
fully recognize that like DC is a town of egos, and like, you know, people don't like hearing the truth. But
Mhm.
also, like, we
Yep.
don't have time, I don't think. I don't have time to keep doing the same thing over and over, talking about the same stuff and not solving problems that are like fully solvable just because like we're afraid of offending someone who used to work at OMB who now is at a place that matters and could fund something that we want to do. Like, I, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think that that's why the American people are fed up with like the DC class. Um,
Yeah, I've enjoyed coming back home from DC to small Longview just because it's so different, you know. I don't know if I could live out there for 5, 10, 15 years without feeling overwhelmed by the energy that's there.
yeah. Well, I don't think I have been, mostly because I'm not a political person.
Hmm.
Like, I don't live and breathe politics. I work around it, but like, I don't care for it. I don't think about it. I don't watch election results. Uh, None of my groups have political action committees. So like, what I've seen is there's kind of two different versions of people in DC. It's like people who know what they're doing or talking about,
Hmm.
and people who have money to talk to other people who are very special people. And unfortunately, too much of our policy discourse is driven by the very special people who are, more interested in, lining their pockets and maybe getting their companies in business. Like, it, this is why Jeffrey Epstein is such a big thing, right? When everyone is like, oh, the rich people in this country have just been self dealing with each other and like working with each other for so
Yeah.
long in all sorts of ways. And you have very high level people who have been in the cabinets of various presidents who are still messaging the guy.
Yeah.
I,
I
to me, there's
I
like
was gonna I
something
was
going
gonna
on.
ask you a Jeffrey Epstein question, but we don't have enough time. So
Yeah.
I'll ask you a different question to close out our conversation. So Jason, we've talked about a lot of things today. But if you had your kids listening to this, say 10 to 15 years from now, they're close to being adults or are adults. What do you hope to get out of the work that you've done so far?
I think that they could take away or hear the things that matter most are, leading with your values, sticking with your friends, and always being honest. Sometimes it means I'm on the outside looking in. Sometimes it means I'm giving voice to the things that I know many other people are thinking, but aren't brave enough to say because they might suffer more consequences. Like, at the end of the day, as a white man in America, like, I know all the privileges that I have, and like, I'm going to use them as far as I can take them in service of other people who don't have that. Um, and I've really leaned into that, you know, through my work, and continue to do so in my unemployment, for for better or worse. And I think that is like, we need authenticity. I think
Yeah.
we have a crisis of authenticity here, but I know that
Yeah.
the right folks are around. And, I believe firmly in like the tipping point concept that like, I think that there's enough like minded people. I just don't think that we all are yet in touch with one another. So if we want to do something differently, if we want to have different vibes, we need to find ways to connect with those folks and make that different future a reality. And I also think that that's part of what our country needs. How do we connect with people closer to home who might be different from us, but like want the same things in their community, like to be able to go to school or go to church or go to the store safely without being worried and come home
Hmm.
after to see your family. It's like pretty
Yeah. I mean,
basic
the
stuff.
basics are still the basics, regardless of how you feel about things. And I definitely love how we ended our conversation with authenticity, because I do think that there's just so much out there that it makes it hard to know what's authentic or not anymore. Both from a personal perspective, especially using tools like AI, to just being honest in the workplace and doing the things you say you're going to do and not being a jerk and being a good person,
It
you
goes a
know?
long way, but it's easier said than done. And
No, I hear you, brother. Jason, I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on, telling your story. I think that the things that you've done are incredible, and I feel like there's just so much of the work that you've done that people just don't know about because they don't understand or have never been privy to that sphere of the universe that's happening. But I think it's a great thing. And so I appreciate you and all of your hard work, and I wish you well, and I hope you find something soon.
thanks, Savon. I really appreciate it. This was fun to do. I hope folks take away some positive lessons and things learned. Life isn't easy. That's why they tell you to
Yep.
get a helmet. But like, you keep going. You have your
Yep.
personal board of advisors and your friend in your corner, and like, hopefully they can keep giving you energy like they do for me. That's I'm checking in with people a lot to keep filling up my battery.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Very, very underrated, understated activity. And so I fully support that as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Savan. Glad you're doing this. Hope it's useful for your audience.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks,
Cheers,
Jason.
man. Peace.
All right. Cheers.